I always believed that love was about acceptance. You find someone, you embrace their flaws, and they do the same for you. That's what love is supposed to be, right? I thought Jenna and I had that. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Our careers, our home, even our friends would say we were the ideal couple. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling like I was chasing perfection, not love. Jenna always wanted more. It wasn't enough that we were doing well. It had to be flawless. The house couldn't just be clean. It had to be immaculate. Our careers couldn't just be successful. They had to be the best. Even our conversations, small talks over dinner, felt like they needed to meet some unspoken standard of perfection. At first, I went along with it because, well, that's what you do for the person you love. You try, you adjust. But in trying to meet her endless expectations, I started losing sight of myself. As time went on, the pressure only grew. What started as little things, like rearranging the furniture or making sure every weekend was planned, turned into something bigger, something that weighed on me every single day. Jenna wanted everything to be perfect, and I just couldn't keep up. It felt like I was constantly running a race with no finish line. I thought maybe I wasn't trying hard enough, that if I just pushed myself a little more, I could meet her expectations. But every time I thought I'd done enough, there was always something else. A new goal, a higher bar. It was exhausting. The moments that used to feel easy and natural between us became tense. I couldn't even relax in my own home without wondering if there was something I'd missed, something that wasn't up to Jenna's standard. I started questioning myself. Why couldn't I handle it? Was I not capable of giving her what she wanted? I had always prided myself on being someone who could rise to the occasion, but now it felt like I was always falling short. And the more I struggled to meet her expectations, the further away I felt from the person I used to be. I think that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Jenna's need for perfection. This was about me losing myself in the process. The man she fell in love with was slowly disappearing, and I didn't know how to stop it. One afternoon, I met up with an old friend for coffee, someone who knew me well but hadn't seen me in a while. As we caught up, he noticed something was off. I thought I was putting on a brave face, but he could see through it. "You don't seem like yourself, man. Everything okay with Jenna?" he asked, concern etched on his face. In that moment, I found myself torn. I wanted to tell him everything, to spill the struggles I had been keeping bottled up. But part of me was scared that if I admitted it out loud, it would make it all too real. I brushed it off, giving him a half-hearted smile and a vague response, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Later, I couldn't shake his words. I started to replay our conversation over and over in my mind. It was almost like a light bulb went off. I realized that my friend wasn't just noticing my unhappiness. He was pointing out the reality I had been too afraid to confront. The pressure, the demands, the feeling of being suffocated. It wasn't just my imagination. It was real, and it was happening right in front of me. Accepting that truth was a struggle. I had always believed that love meant enduring and adapting, but now I was questioning whether enduring meant losing myself completely. My friend's observation lingered in my thoughts, igniting an internal battle. I was stuck between the belief that I needed to hold on to my marriage and the growing realization that it might be the very thing that was suffocating me. As I grappled with the realization that my relationship was unraveling, I felt my self-esteem begin to plummet. I had always seen myself as a capable, confident man, but now I was questioning everything about who I was. Every time Jenna pointed out something I did wrong, be it a missed chore or a failed dinner reservation, I could feel my sense of self-worth slipping further away. The constant feedback, intended or not, made me feel inadequate. I started measuring my worth by how well I could meet her expectations. I remember standing in front of the mirror, barely recognizing the man looking back at me. The confidence I once had faded under the weight of judgment and disappointment, and all I could see were my shortcomings. I found myself withdrawing from friends, avoiding social gatherings, and hiding my feelings even more. It wasn't just that I was feeling low. I was afraid of being judged, of letting anyone see how much I was struggling. I wondered if they would look at me and think, how did he let this happen? Deep down, I feared that I was destined to be alone, that the ideal of love I had chased for so long would never be mine. I felt like a failure, not just as a husband, but as a man. The world around me seemed to thrive on success and achievement, while I felt like I was sinking in quicksand, struggling to breathe. The pain of this realization was suffocating. I wanted to fight back, to reclaim my confidence, but every step forward felt like a battle against my own reflection. And that battle only intensified the conflict inside me. Was it truly love, if it came at such a steep cost to my own identity? That night, as I sat across from Jenna at the dinner table, the air felt thick with unspoken words. I could see it in her eyes. She was ready to critique my every move. The tension had become a constant companion, and I knew I couldn't hide from the truth any longer. My heart raced as I prepared myself for what I needed to say. "Jenna, we need to talk," I finally said, my voice shaking with anxiety. The moment those words left my lips, a wave of fear washed over me. I had rehearsed this conversation in my head countless times, but now that I was finally saying it, I felt vulnerable, exposed. Her expression shifted from curiosity to defensiveness. "What's wrong, Jake? You've been distant lately," she shot back, her tone already laced with irritation. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "It's us. I feel like I'm losing myself trying to keep up with your expectations. It's suffocating me, Jenna." The words poured out, each one heavy with emotion. I watched as her face contorted from confusion to anger, and I braced myself for the fallout. "Losing yourself? Are you kidding me?" she snapped, her voice rising. "I'm just trying to make our life better. If you'd put in a little more effort, maybe we wouldn't be in this position." Her words felt like daggers, piercing through the fragile bubble of hope I had tried to build. "This isn't about effort, Jenna. It's about love. I thought we were in this together." The room erupted into chaos as we began to shout over each other. Every criticism I had bottled up came flooding out, and I could see the hurt in her eyes, mirrored by the pain that throbbed in my chest. It was as if I was watching our relationship unravel in real time. I was terrified of what this confrontation would mean for us, yet it felt like the only way to finally breathe again. In that moment, everything shifted. I was no longer just the husband who was trying to please his wife. I was a man fighting for his identity, for his right to be accepted as he was. But as I stood there, tears streaming down my face, I realized that this wasn't just a turning point for our relationship. It was the beginning of a long, painful journey I had to take, either toward a healthier love or toward letting go completely. After that explosive confrontation, I felt like I had been thrown into a storm. Jenna and I had said things that could never be unsaid, and as I lay awake that night, my heart felt heavy with grief. I had fought for my voice, yet somehow it felt like I had lost everything. The tears streamed down my face, blurring the edges of my reality. I had finally spoken up, but at what cost? The next few days were a blur of chaos and silence. Jenna was distant, and the house felt like a ghost of what it used to be. Every corner echoed with memories of laughter, now replaced by a suffocating tension. I would catch glimpses of her in the kitchen or the living room, but those moments felt surreal, as if we were strangers living under the same roof. It hurt to see her, yet I couldn't tear myself away from the memories of who we once were. I'd find myself spiraling into a pit of despair, wondering how we had arrived at this point. Was it too late to turn back? The weight of the heartbreak pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of emotions, anger, sadness, and confusion, all crashing over me at once. I tried to reach out to friends, but I felt like I was stuck in a cycle of self-pity, too ashamed to admit how deeply I was hurting. Why can't I just be happy? I would whisper to myself, my voice echoing in the empty spaces of our home. The man I once was seemed to have vanished, replaced by a shell of uncertainty and fear. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I discovered that Jenna had reached out to her family, seeking their support. I felt a knife twist in my gut. The idea that my struggles were now being discussed behind closed doors, that my pain was the topic of conversation among her family, shattered me even further. It was one thing to face the turmoil of our relationship, but now I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if my heart was laid bare for everyone to see. Each day became a battle against the overwhelming ache of loss. I had hoped that our love could withstand the pressure, but with every passing moment, I wondered if that love had turned into a burden too heavy to bear. The emotional turmoil felt endless, and I started to fear that this heartbreak would define me, leaving scars that would never heal. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself standing at a crossroads, paralyzed by indecision. The weight of my emotions was suffocating, and I felt like I was caught in a relentless cycle of hope and despair. Could I really walk away from the life I had built with Jenna? The thought terrified me, but so did the idea of staying in a relationship that was slowly suffocating me. I remember sitting in the living room, the silence so loud it echoed in my mind. Memories of happier times flooded my thoughts, making my heart ache even more. I thought of our first dates, the laughter we shared, and the dreams we painted for our future. How had it come to this? Was it possible that we could recapture that magic? Or was I clinging to a fantasy? Every conversation we had felt like walking through a minefield. I could sense her frustration building, and every time I tried to express my feelings, it only led to more conflict. I didn't want to hurt her, but I also couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that I was losing myself in the process. It felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells, fearing that one wrong move would send us crashing into chaos again. The thought of leaving weighed heavily on me. What would that mean for us? For me, the idea of packing up my life, of saying goodbye to the woman I once loved so deeply, felt like tearing out a piece of my soul. But I also realized that staying meant accepting a version of love that was unhealthy, that threatened to erase who I was. One night, I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the wall, as tears streamed down my face. I had always believed that love meant sacrifice, that it was about holding on through the storms. But was I sacrificing my happiness for the illusion of love? I felt trapped, like I was standing on the precipice of a cliff, looking down at the unknown below. In that moment, I knew I had to make a choice. The thought of leaving terrified me, but staying felt like a slow death. It was then that I realized true love should uplift, not suffocate. I had to consider what was best for both of us, even if it meant walking away from everything I once held dear. With the weight of my decision hanging over me, I knew I couldn't navigate this alone anymore. I needed support, a lifeline in the storm that had become my life. But the thought of reaching out felt daunting. I had always been the strong one, the one who others leaned on. Admitting my struggles felt like exposing a vulnerability I had long hidden. Eventually, I mustered the courage to reach out to my closest friend, Mike. I'd known him for years, and he had always been my rock. We met at a small diner, and as I sat across from him, I could feel the familiar knot tightening in my stomach. "Jake, what's going on?" he asked, concern etched on his face. For the first time, I let the floodgates open. I told him everything. The pressure from Jenna, the emotional turmoil, and my fear of losing myself. As the words poured out, I could see the empathy in his eyes. "Man, that sounds incredibly tough," he said softly. "You deserve to be happy, you know that, right?" Hearing those words was like a balm on my raw wounds. It felt liberating to voice my struggles aloud, and in that moment, I realized how much I had been holding in. Mike listened without judgment, allowing me to express my fears and doubts without the need for a facade. I felt seen, understood, for perhaps the first time in months. Encouraged by his support, I reached out to my family next. It was a difficult conversation, one that left me feeling vulnerable and exposed. I told them about the struggles Jenna and I were facing, the heartache that had been suffocating me for so long. "You've always put others before yourself, Jake," my mum said gently. "It's okay to prioritize your own happiness." Her words resonated deeply, yet I still felt a pang of guilt. As I leaned on my friends and family, I began to see that I wasn't alone in this fight. They offered me perspectives I hadn't considered, and slowly I started to regain a sense of clarity. I realized that seeking help didn't make me weak, it made me human. I could lean on others without losing myself, and in that newfound strength, I began to feel a flicker of hope. But even as I surrounded myself with support, the reality of my situation loomed large. I was still faced with the heart-wrenching decision of whether to stay in a relationship that felt more like a burden than a blessing. I knew that whatever path I chose, I had to do it with intention and courage. As I leaned into the support from my friends and family, I began to notice a subtle shift within myself. The storm that had raged in my mind started to quiet down, allowing space for clarity and healing. I realized I was at a critical juncture, not just in my relationship, but in my life. I could choose to stay in the shadows of my self-doubt, or I could step into the light of my own strength. I began prioritizing self-care in ways I hadn't before. I started jogging again, something I had neglected during the tumultuous months with Jenna. Each morning, as I laced up my shoes and hit the pavement, I felt a sense of freedom. With every step, I shed layers of guilt and self-criticism, allowing myself to reconnect with the person I once was. The physical exertion released pent-up emotions, and I found solace in the rhythm of my heartbeat and the sound of my breath. During this time, I also sought out therapy, which was another step I had hesitated to take. Sitting across from a professional felt daunting at first, but it quickly became a safe haven for me to unpack my feelings. I learned that it was okay to be angry, sad, or confused about what was happening in my life. I didn't have to carry that burden alone anymore. My therapist encouraged me to explore my emotions, to understand that healing was a journey, not a destination. Each session became a building block toward rediscovering my identity. I found the courage to reflect on what I truly wanted, beyond Jenna, beyond the pressures of our relationship. I started to dream again, envisioning a life where I could be authentic, where I could embrace my flaws without fear of judgment. The strength I was cultivating felt empowering, and for the first time in a long while, I began to see a glimmer of hope for the future. With each passing day, I felt lighter. I reconnected with friends, shared laughs, and indulged in moments that reminded me of who I was outside of my relationship. I began to reclaim my interests, picking up hobbies I had neglected and rediscovering passions that had once ignited my spirit. The more I engaged in these activities, the more I felt like the man I used to be, confident, hopeful, and full of life. But amid this personal growth, a nagging uncertainty lingered. As I became stronger, I couldn't help but wonder, how would I approach my relationship with Jenna when the time came? Would she understand the changes I was undergoing? Could we find a way to bridge the gap that had grown between us? In the midst of my healing journey, I found myself at a local bookstore one afternoon, browsing through the aisles. It was a spontaneous decision, an escape from my routine that I hadn't realized I needed. As I turned the corner into the fiction section, I bumped into a woman named Sarah. She was lively, with an infectious laugh that instantly drew me in. We struck up a conversation about our favorite books, and as we talked, I felt a spark of connection that had been absent from my life for so long. There was something refreshing about our interaction. No expectations, no pressure. It felt like a breath of fresh air after months of feeling suffocated by my relationship with Jenna. As we exchanged numbers and agreed to meet again, a mix of excitement and guilt washed over me. I hadn't planned on finding someone new, yet here I was, drawn to Sarah's warmth and humor. Our dates began innocently, filled with laughter and shared experiences that helped me rediscover the joy of companionship. But even as I enjoyed this new connection, the shadows of my past loomed large. The memories of my struggles with Jenna haunted me, making it difficult to fully open my heart to someone else. I found myself hesitant to share my past, afraid that the baggage I carried might scare Sarah away. Yet, she was patient, always encouraging me to be honest about my feelings and experiences. Slowly, I began to trust her. I shared snippets of my journey, the suffocating pressure I felt, the heartache, and the realization that I needed to prioritize my happiness. To my surprise, Sarah listened without judgment, her empathy providing a safe space for me to express my vulnerabilities. I began to see that healing didn't mean erasing my past. It meant embracing it and allowing it to shape who I was becoming. With Sarah, I learned to open up again, to experience the thrill of vulnerability without fear of losing myself. We spent hours talking about our dreams and aspirations, painting a vision of what love could be, supportive, uplifting, and genuine. As we shared moments of laughter and connection, I felt a renewed sense of hope blooming within me. But the emotional scars from my relationship with Jenna lingered. I still found myself grappling with guilt. Guilt for moving on, for finding happiness outside of my marriage. It was a constant battle, one that left me questioning if I was ready to fully embrace this new chapter. Yet, as I spent more time with Sarah, I realized that I didn't have to choose between my past and my future. I could honor my experiences while also welcoming the possibility of new love. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was reclaiming my life, allowing myself to believe that happiness was not just a distant dream, but a reality I could create for myself. As my connection with Sarah deepened, I began to rediscover what it meant to be truly happy. We explored new places together, laughed until our sides hurt, and shared quiet moments that reminded me of the simple joys in life. With every adventure, I felt pieces of my old self being restored, the confident and carefree man I had thought was lost forever. It wasn't just the fun we had, it was the way Sarah made me feel seen and valued. She encouraged me to pursue my passions and dreams, supporting my growth as an individual. We talked openly about our fears and aspirations, building a foundation of trust that I had longed for in my previous relationship. The more I allowed myself to be vulnerable, the more I discovered how liberating it felt to love and be loved in return. However, the shadows of my past relationship still lingered in the corners of my mind. I had to confront the guilt that occasionally crept in, reminding me of my life with Jenna. But I began to understand that moving forward didn't mean forgetting the lessons I had learned. I realized that my experiences had shaped me, teaching me the importance of balance in a relationship and the necessity of being true to oneself. One evening, as we sat together under a starlit sky, I turned to Sarah and shared my journey, the struggles, the heartbreak, and how I had almost lost sight of who I was. To my relief, she didn't shy away. Instead, she listened intently, her eyes reflecting understanding and compassion. "You deserve this happiness, Jake," she said softly, and in that moment, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. With Sarah, I began to see love not as a series of expectations, but as a partnership grounded in respect and acceptance. I learned to embrace my imperfections and understand that vulnerability was not a weakness, but a strength. I felt empowered to be myself, no longer burdened by the fear of judgment or criticism. As our relationship blossomed, I found myself smiling more often, laughing louder, and experiencing the world through a renewed lens of hope. I realized that love could be a source of joy and growth, rather than a constraint. Sarah had become not just a partner, but a confidant and a best friend. Together, we were building something beautiful, something that felt authentic and real. In time, I came to fully embrace this new chapter in my life, understanding that I had the power to shape my own happiness. I was no longer the man trapped by unrealistic expectations. I was free to love deeply and without reservation. My journey had led me to this moment, and I knew I was finally on the right path, ready to face whatever came next. As I reflect on this journey, I realize how far I've come, from the depths of emotional turmoil to the heights of newfound happiness. The road wasn't easy. It was filled with heartache, self-discovery, and ultimately, growth. But I stand here today, not as the man I once was, but as someone who has learned to embrace the complexities of love and life. In the aftermath of my relationship with Jenna, I came to understand that it was okay to let go. Sometimes, love isn't enough to sustain a relationship, especially when it's steeped in unrealistic expectations and pressure. I've learned that true love is rooted in acceptance, empathy, and mutual respect, qualities that had been absent in my previous relationship. Letting go was painful, but it was also a necessary step toward reclaiming my identity. With Sarah by my side, I feel a sense of hope that I hadn't felt in a long time. Our love is a breath of fresh air, a gentle reminder that happiness can be found even after heartache. We're building a life together that celebrates our individuality while intertwining our dreams and aspirations. I've learned to communicate openly, to express my needs without fear, and to embrace vulnerability as a strength rather than a weakness. Each day brings new challenges, but I face them with a renewed sense of purpose. I've become more attuned to my emotions, allowing myself to experience the full spectrum of feelings: joy, sadness, excitement, and everything in between. I've realized that healing is an ongoing journey, one that requires patience and self-compassion. As I look forward, I'm filled with optimism. I no longer carry the burdens of the past. Instead, I'm excited about what the future holds. I've learned that life is unpredictable, and while it may not always follow the path we envision, it often leads us to unexpected blessings. This chapter of my life is about new beginnings, embracing love that lifts me up and encourages me to be my best self. I'm ready to face the future with an open heart, to continue growing alongside Sarah, and to cherish the lessons I've learned along the way. Life is an emotional roller coaster, but I'm grateful for every twist and turn that has brought me to this moment. So, here's to new beginnings, to love that nourishes and inspires, and to a future filled with endless possibilities.